So now we are going to talk about the first meaning-based component of reading, and that is vocabulary. So, what is vocabulary? It's knowing what the words mean, and it's the words that we understand that we can use when we're speaking and listening and reading and writing. But it is also all of that background knowledge, all of those things that come from context that if you're reading along and if you didn't grow up in this country, you weren't educated in this country, you don't have a knowledge of American history or pop culture or music or anything that all of that combines into our knowledge base that vocabulary relates to. And so all of that has to do with vocabulary. So I know that sometimes when I've been planning lessons for my learners, I thought, oh, this would be it'd be great, to do a reading on this particular topic. And then I think, oh my gosh, okay, let's think about all of the different cultural elements that go into that my learners wouldn't have. And so I would need to remediate so much that it would take many, many, many lessons. So think about that. And it's not just people who weren't, born in this country. Folks who grew up in a particular part of this country or didn't have an opportunity for a lot of formal education, they may lack this background knowledge as well. Knowledge of history, social studies, science, things like that. Okay. So why is vocabulary important? So for beginners, right, the vocabulary and knowing what the vocabulary is when you're speaking and listening and reading and writing, that is the basis for creating meaning. You must know about 90% of the word's meaning in any sentence for you to understand what the sentence is about. So if you can't understand what the reader's message is, then you're just not going to have the comprehension. And so they need to learn new vocabulary words to become better readers. So again, for those of you who have tried to learn another language, vocabulary is a huge part of that, right? You have to build your vocabulary bank so that you can construct meaning when you are reading and listening. So who needs vocabulary instruction? Certainly English language learners, right? People who do not have English as their first language. Of course, they have a whole language to learn. And so absolutely they need vocabulary. Also, intermediate and high level learners, right? They are encountering words that they may never have been exposed to before, especially if they have academic aspirations and they want to get a high school degree or go to college. Then there are some academic words that they may need to know. Um, you don't see low level learners on this list. Low-level native English speaking learners. Why would you not see them? Why are they not on this list?
Maybe because they need to understand the phonics first, maybe, or just knowing how to say a word, and then maybe the vocabulary be too overwhelming for them to learn too much. Maybe, I
Well,
guess.
you know what? I think the first part of what you said is spot on, right? So if you are at such a low level of learner that you are focused on learning phonics, right? You're focused on sounding out the words. You are going to be reading sentences like the cat sat on the mat, right? Well, if I'm a native English learner, I know what a cat is. I know what the verb sat is, and I know what a mat is, right? So I'm reading at such a low level of vocabulary that it's already in my speaking and listening vocabulary as a native English speaker. So I'm not going to be, as a beginning level reader, I'm not going to be reading multisyllabic words. I'm not going to be reading, very difficult words. So vocabulary is not my major issue as a beginning level native English speaking learner. Okay. So what are the best ways to teach vocabulary? Um, and so this is what happens in how many of you are using textbooks with your learners? Okay. For those of you who are, you've probably noticed that if there are reading passages that before you get to the paragraph of reading in a textbook, there are usually words, isolated words that are pulled out. It's usually before you actually read the passage. And so that is an example of pre-teaching unfamiliar words in a text. And so the text or you can anticipate what words might be a problem for learners, right? It's like, okay, well, if we're reading at this level, you probably haven't encountered these words before, and I am guessing that we need to talk about those words and make sure you understand the meaning before we actually read a passage. And you want to do it before you read rather than when you're reading because of the fluency element, right? You want to keep flowing as you're reading so that your comprehension is not interrupted. And so in order to do that, you need to discuss the vocabulary words that you don't know before you start reading the text. You may then, start reading the text and your learner will say, "Oh, wait, I don't know what that word means," right? And then you'll talk about that later, but you don't want to interrupt the flow of the reading. So that is one. Is anybody doing that right now? And because it's often in textbooks, but do you also do that if you're reading, say, a story with your learner? Can you anticipate what the words are that your learner might have trouble with?
We
Okay.
have a book club, a learner book club at we choose a reader level, like a third grade level, controlled vocabulary. And then the tutors and the learners will work together. Like they'll do 3 chapters every month, and then we come together once a month and we talk about those 3 chapters. And so they will pull out vocabulary and concepts to pre-teach, especially with ESL learners who some of this stuff might be completely. We read a book recently where they built a house and there was framing going up, and the people who are from Mexico or from China. So we don't build houses with wood framing. We did not understand what that was all about. We build stuff out of Adobe bricks so we got the Oxford Picture Dictionary and we looked at what tools are. So you pre-teach this stuff beforehand. Otherwise, even if you know what the word is, you don't really know what the word is. You can read the letters, but you don't know the meaning. Mm-hmm. So that's a case where the tutor then has to do a little legwork to predict. I think this might be an unfamiliar concept. I think this might be a word you wouldn't have come across. But then if you're using a workbook like Challenger or something, then they have a little box where they say, here's vocabulary to pre-teach. So that helps too. They do the legwork for you.
That's a great example. Thank you, Nicole. Great. Cassandra.
Yeah, we like to use the News for You newspapers, and those are really handy because they already pick out that vocabulary ahead of time as well and put a glossary of those vocab words at the end. We like using it in an online class, but we've also used them in person. So it's helpful to just have materials that already do that work for you, but we go over how to choose certain vocab words over another to pre-teach as well.
Excellent. And so it's like, yeah, how do you know which words to pre-teach? That's great. And can you explain to everybody what News for You is?
Oh, right. Sorry. So News for You is that both print and online publication. It's a real weekly newspaper that is made for adult learners. So I believe a lot of programs have free access to this through Pro Literacy. Yes, someone's almost holding it up. She has the print one. If you didn't know, there's also an online version of that learners can access as well with a password. and you can listen to the story. So there's an or there's a audio visual component to the print.
Mhm.
Oh, thank you. And, many of our learners come to programs and they say, I just want to be able to read the newspaper, or I want to keep up with current events. I hear people talking and I, can't join the conversation because I don't know. And so I love News for You because it doesn't dumb down the stories. They're not childish. They're, very adult. They just simplify the language and the sentence structure, and they make it more accessible. And they cover, world events, international news, domestic news. They usually have a human interest story. Do they still have crossword puzzles, or
Yeah.
that kind of
Yeah,
thing? There are notes for
really fun.
the teachers and tutors.
Mhm.
So, it I was the most current on current events when I was, using News for You with my learners. So it's a great resource. Thank you for that. And yeah, and they pull the words out for you.
And there's teacher's guides. So if you struggle with coming up with activities or questions, they have that ready for tutors to use.
That's great. Thank you. And so, yeah, so we can anticipate what words might be challenging. Texts can anticipate. What is the very best way to identify words that our learners are not familiar with the meaning of? Who knows best? The learners, right?
They do, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So always ask learners. And, it's interesting because you may say, okay, you don't know what this word means. It's architect. And the learner may say, oh, I know what an architect is. Again, I couldn't decode it, right? I didn't know that that's what architect looks like in writing. So, then that's where the decoding versus the vocabulary comes in. So yeah, ask your learners. They can scan, they can say, run your eyes over this page and look for any words that, you may not know the meaning of or that look unfamiliar. And let's talk about them before we read that paragraph. Okay. So the way that many of us, especially those of us of a certain generation, learned vocabulary words is completely opposite to the best practice way to learn them. And so tell me if this sounds familiar to any of you. On Monday, you got a list of 10, 15 words. Okay, did anybody have that experience in school? Okay, I can't see you all. Okay. And then what did you do? You've got these 10 or 15 words. What did you do with them? What did the teacher ask you to do with them?
Use them in a sentence.
Use them in a sentence. Great. Yeah. What else?
Somebody put in the chat, define them. Someone
Yep.
else memorize and copy.
Mhm.
I had to memorize the definition and spelling.
Mhm.
Look them up in the dictionary and write the definition down, learn to spell them.
And when I was going to school, we wrote the dictionary definition, right?
Ah.
The teacher didn't say, okay, great, that's the dictionary definition. Now you put it into your own words, right? You make it your own and it was to the dictionary definition. Okay. And that's what my teachers asked me to do. And that was all on Monday. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we didn't do anything with those words. And then on Friday, there was a test,
Spelling test.
a spelling test, a vocabulary test. And then on Monday, we got a whole new set of words and we never came back to the words that we learned the last week. So that is a really poor, ineffective way to teach vocabulary. So we want to make sure that we are exposing our students to many different encounters with vocabulary words, making sure that they see them, say them, listen to them in lots of different ways, many, many times. I can't remember the number of times that we know from research that you need to repeat a word and be exposed to it to have it become part of your vocabulary. Is it 12 times or 20 times? Something like that. But once is not enough. Twice is not enough. You need to work with these, play with the words. And so useful words, real life words, or words that they might, if they want to become a plumber, right? What are the vocabulary words that they are going to encounter when they need their, plumber's license? Okay. So engage students in working on several different ways, lots of different ways. So what are some ways that you and as a program staff or as a tutor, what are some ways that you help your learners really internalize that vocabulary? How do you play with those words? I know you all do this, especially those of you who have been working with learners for a while. You probably just don't even think about all the different ways that you do it.
I've had the opportunity to differentiate like words that are spelled similarly, for example, but are read differently and mean differently,
Yeah.
and put them in a funny sentence so
Mhm.
that they remember it as kind of like a joke.
Mhm.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, making it memorable, right? So you create a sentence with homophones or homographs or, these words that are so tricky, especially for English language learners, and you make it into a fun activity that they'll remember. That's a great idea. Yeah. What else? Did anybody do word searches or hangman or crossword puzzles or fill in the blank or yeah, Marilyn?
Well, one that I like is levels of knowing. Have you heard of that? I don't know if I
Tell
can
us.
describe it very well, but share a word with the learner, and on a scale of, I don't remember if it's 1 to 5 or 1 to 4, but the first level is I don't know this word. I've never seen this word before. I have no idea what it means.
Uh-huh.
One is, you would say the word obviously, but I've heard the word, but I don't know what it means. And then the third level would be I've heard the word and I think I know what it means. And then the fourth level would be I know the word, I can spell it, and I think I could use it in a sentence. And then the fifth is obviously I know it, I can spell it, I know what it means, and I can use it in a sentence. So that's kind of a little chart you can do with learners. And then as you work with the words that they're studying, let's say you've pulled words out of a story for pre-teaching or from News for You, you can create a little chart that has those levels of knowing. And then as you practice, they can, see themselves increasing in their competence with the use of that word.
Oh, thank you, Marilyn. That's Edgar Dale's Degrees of Word
That's what
Knowledge.
it is.
And yeah, and we can put that
Oh,
on
we put that on the Padlet. We keep
Yeah,
thinking
and
things.
in the 2-hour vocabulary workshop, we would have actually done a little exercise where I would have introduced you to that scale, and I would have then given you some vocabulary words, and I would
Mhm.
have asked you to rate yourself
Yeah.
using that scale. And it can be really helpful if you introduce that scale to your learners because you can say, oh, okay, they totally know this word. This is, they are familiar with it. It's in their vocabulary toolbox. We don't need to spend time on this, right? Or it's like, oh, this word is one that the learner is almost confident in using correctly. If we put a little time and effort into that, maybe that can, bump up into the level of, yeah, I'm confident into this
Got
word.
that.
So that's a
Yeah.
great word. So once you introduce your learner to that scale, you can say, is that a 1 word for you? Is that a 4? Where is that for you? And do you want to spend time on that? So I really find that a very helpful concept. Thank you for bringing that up.
Sure. There's some good chats in here too. So Estefania says she uses a word search, example sentences, asks them for their understanding of the word, asks for synonyms. That's a really good one. Nicole makes crossword puzzles for their book club. That's really fun. And there's apps that are, programs that'll just create a crossword puzzle for you online. Michelle Sosa says Mad Libs, and Susan Corona doubled down on that. And Michelle also. The 3 Mad Lib winners.
Excellent. And thank you, because I was
People
like,
get
what is
competitive.
excellent. Thank you. So these are all good. And the more fun you can have, the better it is. And so we have a video with a colleague of Marilyn's at Reed Santa Clara. And oh my gosh, I think it's like she uses 25 different strategies for playing around with vocabulary words with her learners. So I'd encourage you to take a peek at that video. And I think it's actually, it's working with words in many ways
Oh yeah.
with Jane.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and then, it seems a little old-fashioned, but it's actually very effective. So I'm sure you remember learning about root words and prefixes and suffixes. And that's actually a really great way to study vocabulary, right? Because it's like, okay, this is a root word, and if we put this prefix on it, it changes it this way. If we put this suffix, it makes it so it shows the relationship between words, and that words are not just isolated entities. They have relationships with other words, and that makes learning words much less daunting. Imagine if you said to a learner, oops, sorry. Yeah, no word in the English language has any relation to any other word. You just have to learn every single word on its own. It's like, oh my gosh, how can I do that? But when you say, it's like, if you know this word, then you're going to be able to figure out this other word that is made from it. We'll talk a little bit more about context clues in the comprehension section on Thursday, but when, their context clues are, when there are words or phrases in the sentence that help define the word itself. It doesn't always work, right? There aren't always context clues, or the difficulty about context clues is that sometimes they're not in the same sentence. Maybe they're before the word that you don't know, or they're, at the end of the paragraph. But knowing how to use context clues is a learned skill. You need to actually explicitly teach how do you work with context clues? How do you find the words that define them? And so you need to deconstruct how context clues are used. And then again, using a dictionary, it's great, right? And I find the electronic dictionary much more helpful, because why? Why might you think that an electronic dictionary is more helpful to our learners than a printed dictionary?
I think it might be easier.
Mhm.
In my experience, when I increased my vocabulary a lot, I had one of those. We didn't have smartphones yet.
Right.
So I had a digital dictionary where I read the letter and I just typed it in. I found it quite a bit harder to look through the dictionary, and sometimes I would like pass a page and the order of the letters were a little off, and I'm like, oh, now I have to find my way back to the correct page. So that's a struggle that I've personally experienced. I can't imagine someone who's learning how to read,
A lot
how
of
much more
people
difficult that might be for them.
Yeah, learning how to use a dictionary is a skill in itself, right? But in the electronic form, you just type in the word, it tells you the definition. You can get the meaning in another language. It can say it for you, so you know the pronunciation. I don't know about you, but I still can't figure out those pronunciation symbols in a printed dictionary. I have no idea, what those are. So it's much more helpful to have somebody say that. So
And sometimes they have the links to the synonyms right below connected to it.
absolutely,
So even
absolutely.
better.
I was teaching about vegetables with my learners, and I'm trying to teach them about, artichoke. And try to explain artichoke, right? But also you use your phone. It's like, this is what an artichoke looks like, right? So smartphones are incredibly helpful for vocabulary learning in so many different ways. How,
Can
oh, go
catch up
ahead,
on
Mary.
the chat a little bit, just some comments
Please.
is that
Yeah.
with the electronic, you can identify misspellings and it has audio if you don't know how to pronounce it correctly. If you're not sure of the spelling, you can do it verbally. And
Right.
Georgina has a good point. The dictionary print can be so small sometimes. She ordered a dictionary recently for an ESL learner and they could hardly make out the words because it was so tiny. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
And I love the point, many people say, well, you have to know how to spell a word
Yeah,
in order
look it
to
up.
look it up in the
Mhm.
dictionary, right? And so, yeah,
Yeah.
and we'll talk later. Oh, it's actually in the ESL version, but the Oxford Picture Dictionaries are one of my very, very, very favorite tools, especially for English language learners, and especially the bilingual ones. I think every ESL student should have a copy of the Oxford Picture Dictionary. So, and then how do you increase your vocabulary? Because vocabulary really is a lifelong learning experience, right? All of us are increasing our vocabulary all the time. How do we do that? Under what circumstances?
I do it some of the same ways. I do crosswords every day and all kinds of word games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Read.
Most of us do it by either listening and but by reading, right? By reading lots of different things. And when you come across a word that you don't know, you look it up. And the beauty of, I don't use a Kindle myself, but I hear the beauty of a Kindle is there's a hyperlink, right? And so you can just look right then and see what the definition is. And so that's terrific. So just encourage lots of different reading. So there are so many words that you could teach. So how do you narrow it down, right? Which words am I going to pre-teach and teach? So teach words that are important for comprehension of text. Not every word carries the same weight. Some are connector words, some are fluff words, some are not essential for comprehending the text. And so, again, your learners may not know how to differentiate between those types of words. But so, really think about, okay, which word is a key to the meaning of this sentence? Again, some they can figure out by context, some they can't. So teach those words that you can't use context clues for. Words that are unfamiliar or especially difficult, you're going to focus on. Um, don't spend time on words that aren't relevant to your learner's life, right? So you want to make sure that these learners will actually, once you introduce them to the meaning of the word, that they're going to see them, that they're going to have experience with them after that fact. And then sometimes you've already taught a word, and this goes back to that, the word, the nature of the word and the root words and the prefixes and suffixes say, oh, remember 2 weeks ago we learned this word. Well, and we learned that word and it was a noun. This is the adjective form of that word. So you play off what you've already learned. So useful words, again, does anybody know what a signal word is? We're going to put a list of them. I think we have them on Padlet, right?
We have a video about signal words.
Oh, did I not put okay, I'm
Yeah,
gonna
your choice. Mm-hmm.
but yeah, we have
I
some
think, yeah, I don't know if we have a list, but yeah.
okay, so I'll be sure to get that to Marilyn to put on. So signal words are key words that say, hey, watch out, pay attention. This is actually important information coming up. So furthermore, next, but, as a result, right? So it's
Consequently.
consequently, right? Therefore.
Mhm.
And so all of these words that are like, oh, okay, I'm going to pay attention because something important is coming up after this. Idioms and phrasal verbs. These are not a problem usually for native English speakers, but they are killers for English language learners. So idioms like, can anybody think of an idiom?
Piece of cake.
It's a piece of cake. It's a piece of cake. That has no literal meaning that makes sense to anybody, right? It's a very cultural, it's a cultural construct.
I
You
love
know,
this one. Stick around. That's a really good one. Stick
stick
around.
around is a great
Easy-
example of a
Easy as
phrasal verb.
pie. Yeah, another idiom. Easy as pie.
Easy as pie.
Pie
Yeah.
is not
Because
easy.
we're all thinking about dessert now.
Yeah.
But
Oh,
so yeah,
hop,
stick
skip, and
around.
jump. I
Stick
love
it
it.
out, stick by,
Mhm.
all of these are crazy. You can have so many different phrasal verbs and they're very confusing, very, very difficult for English language learners. Native English speakers have grown up with them, right? They've been hearing them since they were small, so it's not such a big deal. Words in the news, right? What are some words that are in the news right now that might be helpful?
Oh,
It's an election year, right? All of these election words,
there's a lot of big ones.
inflation,
Mhm.
all of
Um,
these. Yeah,
poll,
so just
that's a good one.
all
Yeah, inflation, conflict,
conflict,
negotiation,
negotiation. So all of these
hostage.
things that, will make your learner able to
Ah,
understand when they're reading a newspaper.
yeah.
Yeah,
Electorate, elect, popular.
right.
Mhm. Good one.
And this brings up another point. Popular, right? The popular vote is different than being popular in high school, right? And that's the other killer things. Again, native English speakers, oh yeah, I know the 5 different meanings of that one word. Native English speakers are like, what? There's more than one meaning for that same word? That's very difficult. So keep that in mind. Subject matter words, science words, social studies, and then we talked about the whole roots, prefixes, and suffixes. We brought up homophones and homographs. What are homophones? Words that sound the same, but
Different meaning.
have different meanings and are spelled differently. What are homographs? They have the same spelling, but they may be pronounced differently and have different meanings. So again, often native English speakers are fine with homophones and homographs. English language learners, they're very, very difficult. Context clues, again, how do I know what is the key, right? If the sentence contains a word that I don't know, can I find it by reading the next sentence? Or can I find it by, finishing the paragraph? Oh, that must be what that word means. You need to explicitly teach that. Okay, and here we come to inferences. Limited knowledge of the subject matter in a text make it hard to make inferences and use context clues. So if you're not familiar with what you're reading about, it will be very, very difficult to understand inference and context clues. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing. That was fast and furious vocabulary. What questions or comments or experiences that you have shared teaching or learning vocabulary would you like to share with the group? Everybody needs a little afternoon cappuccino probably at this point. Thank you for this has been a long day.
You guys are hung in there beautifully and really participated beautifully as well. Love all the comments in the chat.
So do we have Cassandra?
Oh yeah. I just wanted to give an example of how you could use Mad Libs and the News for You resource. What I do is a reverse form of Mad Libs where I'll take out keywords from the story. Maybe we've already read it, or maybe they're looking at the first time. It depends on what your goal is, but we'll take out some like prepositions. We might take out some key verbs, and I'll have the learners try and figure out what should be there to make that sentence make sense. And it's really easy to do with News for You online, because then I can just like on Zoom, I can cover it up and have them type in the chat what words they think should go in the blanks.
That is so clever. That's a great idea. And so you're working on vocabulary, but also comprehension, right? That's terrific. And also some grammar, right? So what kind of word is this? Is it a verb? Is it an adjective? Is it an adverb or a noun? Great.
So
Well-
you have a list from something that you've read in News for You? Is that, or are they coming up with the word on their own after reading it? Or are you providing a list of possible answers?
Right. So it depends on what the goal is for that day, but if we're looking at it fresh, brand new, I've already gone ahead and maybe blacked out some words. I've put it on a document, I've copied and pasted and just blacked out. And then we'll be reading the paragraphs or the sentences out loud one at a time. If I'm in a group, it works really well to have them take turns. And then we'll have a discussion. What word should be there? What word should be in the blank? And then after a couple guesses, I'll unhighlight the word that I blacked out.
Oh,
Like a
very
reverse closed activity.
Yeah.
so fun. Great
Good.
idea.
I like it.
Does anybody else have
Mhm.
questions, comments?